Hello, everyone. I hope you all are able to hear me. So, here I am today, and I am going to be talking about um, an objective method for um, judging our creative potential and abilities um, in order to ensure that we neither misjudge nor underestimate ourselves, neither um, overestimate or underestimate ourselves, right? Um, so this is what I have observed many of my friends and my uh, students question about when they see an image or when they see a reference photo. And I thought it would be helpful if I come and share it with you all. So I'm going to be talking about objective analysis and estimation for self-judgment, for being able to judge our own current potential as to whether we are able to do a painting or not. Right? Many a times you would have um, probably come across situations when you have seen a painting or a reference photo, and you would have seen that there are two types of uh, thoughts that come to your mind or somebody else's mind, right? You would see that some artists would think that um, it's too tough. I don't know how to do it, right? And they would think that I'm sure I wouldn't be able to do it, and they would not even try to do it, right? Try to paint that painting. The other kind I have noticed is many a times some of the artists would think that, oh, this is too simple and I will not do it. Or I will, you know, be they will overestimate um, their potential, and which is good, but overestimating often leads to overconfidence, which can be detrimental while you're executing the painting. So both these can be can be harmful for us when we are trying to paint something. So it's important that when we look at something, we do an objective analysis and estimation of what is needed versus what we have, or what we need to do in order to do it. So then your estimation and your mind is well equipped, and your mind is well prepared to take on the journey um, to execute it in a balanced way. So we will just take a look at what happens. What is the process in which this analysis has to be done in order to arrive at that conclusion, right? So many a times, okay, but many a times what I have seen is, as I said, some of my students would look at the reference photo and they'll say, it's too tough. I don't think I'll be able to do it. And then I ask them to think about why they think, what is it that they think they'll not be able to do in the whole uh, painting reference. And then there are some people who would think that, oh, this is very simple, right? And then you know when they try to execute it, at that time they will sometimes come across difficulties, and then they will feel discouraged because they initially thought that it is going to be very easy, but because it is actually not that easy as they thought it is, they feel discouraged to continue. So what happens exactly when we um, when we have to estimate, when we judge whether we are going to be able to do it or not? So there are two parts to anything. One is what we need, and one is what we think we have, or what we think we are capable of. Let me switch camera 1 second. So yeah, so I hope you are able to see me. So what happens is, um, one youth we is what we when we see something, we need to estimate two things. One is what is needed in order to accomplish that need. And the second is what you think you already know or have. Sorry. Know and have. I am writing it small because we're going to discuss a little bit. Okay, so this is our initial understanding of our analysis of the painting or the reference. And this is your initial analysis of yourself. This is the self-judgment part. This is self or self-analysis, right? And this is an analysis of your reference or analysis of target. Okay, so these are the two things that we have, and we compare both of these. We think people who overestimate themselves will always think that, okay, what I have and what I know is much greater than what is needed. And when we have this kind of a thought, we feel super confident. Confidence is great, but if you greatly overestimate this, right? If it is much, much greater than what is needed, then if that is the kind of thought, you become overconfident, or a person becomes overconfident, right? And a person, similarly, if somebody has thinks that this is too much, the what is needed is much greater than what I have, then what happens? Then this one changes to underconfidence, right? So this is the problem that we are talking about today, right? The need versus have problem that we, and remember, this need and the have are both things that we have judged, and it's all in our head, right? So let's see how these can be objectively done, right? To ensure that what you do, what you analyze is not just, based on a, non-parametric sense of judgment, right? So, uh, one moment. Let me share this. So, how do we do estimation, right? So, let's talk about this, right? What is needed? So, when we look at what is needed, there are we need tools, right? Tools in case of a painting could be paper, your brushes, your colors, the availability of colors, etc., right? um, your tools are also your own skill set, right? If you think that I have the skill set, that's also your tool set and skill set. It includes an understanding of techniques that you think will be needed in order to accomplish this your target, right? What techniques do you think you will need? So when you look at a painting, you will think about what all techniques that you want. Do you want to implement wet on wet washes? Do you want to implement textures? Do you want to implement principles of compositional guidelines and so on, right? A lot of techniques that you will implement or you will need to implement, you think. Those techniques you need to consider. You will think about what techniques you will need, right? Now, so this is your initial estimation of the tool set, right? Now, the next set of questions that you will, so this is the estimation of what is needed, right? Now, this is a very basic estimation. I'll come to a little more details of estimation that you should actually do, right? And then before I go there, I will just briefly touch up on what we think we know and we have, right? Our estimation of ourselves. You will think that yes, you will do an estimation of whether you already understand. Do you understand what is needed in order to accomplish this? Right? The second thing you will think about is whether I can execute. Right? It is one thing to understand, that the techniques that are needed, right? And another thing to know how to execute it, right? So these two are key things that people will think about when they think about whether um, they can understand and execute it. So these two stages, stage 1 and stage 2, are what contribute to people feeling confident about it. So there are a set of artists who will, first think that, oh, okay, this involves, textures. This involves a lot of, say, text, what do you call? Wet on wet washes or things like that, or wet on dry or dry brush techniques. And they will decipher in their mind what all the techniques that will be needed to paint that particular subject. Let's talk, for example, a flower. Right now, the moment they come to understand what techniques will be needed, they think they will tend to jump to the conclusion that, yes, I know it all. Now, there is always a difference between understanding and executing are not equal. Understand is not equal to executing. This is very important for us to understand. So there are a lot of things that we understand, that we know, right? We know, but when it comes to actually implementing it, it will not be the same process, and there is a lot of difference. So, where's the- so people who will, you know, think about this and jump to the conclusion will actually have a lot of problems later on. So it's best that we um, evaluate if we can actually execute it, right? They, so there will be a stage when we think that, okay, I can execute it, right? So I know how to do it, is I understand. I can execute it is the belief that I can execute it, right? I have. Now, there is another part to it, is if I have executed a similar thing in the past, is what gives us double the confidence. Have I executed it? That's experience, right? And experience matters for painting. So this comes from a lot of practice. So when we practice a lot, um, we know that we have the experience from, we have gathered the experience, and then we know that it is it is backed, the feeling of I can execute is backed by experience. Then you feel confident, and that is justifiable, right? And then your understanding of what tools are needed, what techniques are needed, are also a fair estimation of what the process really involves. There is also one thing that we need to consider, and that is the degree of uncertainty, or a degree of possibilities. Let's not call it uncertainty, possibilities while painting. So every painting, particularly in a medium like watercolor, it is not 100%. The beauty of watercolors is that it's not 100% predictable, right? You can have a lot of control over it, but the beauty of the subject or beauty of the medium is when you let it free, right? So the one thing that you should always consider is what is the degree of possibility and freedom that you allow yourself to make this, the painting look different from what is your target. Right? So there will be a variance between your output versus your target. But that variation the variance should be a very comfortable one, right? You should be very comfortable in making this variance uh, a pleasant variance, wherein you're not scared of making it different, right? So in order to ensure that this is pleasant and you have a fair understanding of what is needed, how do you objectively analyze your target? This is very important, right? We need to objectively analyze our target, not just what we can do, right? So this is very important. This is our self analysis part. I hope you can take a note of it. Sorry, this is self analysis, right? And this is the part where we are going to analyze the subject. So when we are analyzing the subject, right, that too has a specific flow that goes on in our mind, right? So first, we tend to, let's say, how do I say? First, we tend to observe. Observe. What do we observe? You might think, okay, I'm looking at the painting now. Observation, actually begins by taking a look at the artwork very, very closely, right? You take a note of all the visual elements like the lines, the shapes, the colors, the textures, the negative space, the positive space. Observe every aspect of the subject matter and try to recognize the overall imagery and the overall composition and how the elements are organized, right? That's very important. So observe the details and the overall picture. So you take it's like looking at it through a microscope and also taking a second look at it through a telescope, right? So one is a microscopic view and one is a telescopic view. So at the macro level and at the micro level, right? So micro and macro. So two levels of understanding or observation that you have. Now, once you have done the observation part, do you jump to the painting? No, right? You have to try and articulate it because you're not going to make a replica of what you see, right? Next is your ability to articulate what you have seen, right? So what do I mean by articulating? Or maybe describe, okay? So in your mind, you have to try and um, describe in simple words. Let me not complicate it. Describe what you see in the artwork by trying to describe each and every visual element that you see, the overall subject that you see, the subject matter, and whether there is any symbolic meaning that you find there, whether there is a story present there, and so on, right? So describe everything in your mind to yourself. That's the second stage. So one is observe, two is articulate or describe. What is the third thing? The third thing is very important. Then we are coming to the important part, that is the analysis part. And analysis can be done in two stages, right? So one is the formal analysis. What is formal analysis, you might think? Formal analysis is what I would call as, uh, you are basically looking at the formal qualities of the artwork or the reference, right? You are looking at the relationship between the different elements on your painting, right? You're looking at the relative sizes, relative color contrasts, relative visual weights of each of the elements in your painting, and they how any shift of those can impact the composition, the overall composition and balance of your painting, the harmony of your painting, right? So um, observe the focal point, observe what takes emphasis or what has most emphasis and what has least emphasis in the painting. So formal analysis is basically a comparison study, right? So this you have to do in your mind, or you can even take notes, right? So we do this at the subconscious level, or maybe initially when you start, we have to do it as a conscious effort, right? And then comes the next thing, that is the um, contextual analysis. So contextual analysis, what is contextual analysis? Contextual analysis is very simple. Okay, it is actually not as complicated as it sounds. It's basically trying to see whether, whether the painting has any backgrounds, right? Like whether it has any relevance to historical events or any social or cultural events or cultural connections that it may have, and things like that, any influences that it may have. Um, for example, if you're doing a fresco, you might want to understand what time period it was created in, or what time period it is trying to reflect, right, in history, things like that. So understanding that will actually help you interpret the meaning and the intention of painting that, right? So that's an important thing that you should keep in mind, right? The context of the painting. Now, once you have done all of this, now it is your turn to interpret. Now, your interpretation might not be the same as the interpretation that I do or the artist himself had uh, of his artwork. So every individual is so unique, right? So as yourself, you have to try and interpret the artwork. It your interpret it yourself, right? So interpret what you understand out of the whole analysis that you have done, based on what you have observed, what you have articulated, how you have described it, and your analysis in these two stages. Based on all of this, you will try to interpret it in your mind. Your mind will build a, a story, an image of its own, right? So do that. See what kind of emotions it's arousing in your mind. And then when you understand all of this, you will have a balanced evaluation. The final thing is about the evaluation. So you evaluate the artwork, right? And you'll basically be formally assessing the artwork by considering the technical parts of it, the impact it had on your mind, or how you have interpreted it. Like, has it been a happy interpretation, or has it given you a little bit of wonder, or a feeling of mistakeness, or whatever, right? Think about that, and whether you feel that that particular artwork is very original, and reflect on how the artist would have thought about it, and so on. So once you do all of this, right, once you do all of this, then you have a very balanced overview of what the true picture of your target reference is, right? So this is a overview balanced analysis, let's call it analysis of the target, right? And once you have done this, you have a firm understanding of what you want to achieve, and of course you will then move on to your analysis of the self, which we just um, described. And your analysis of the self will become more and more robust when you have which one? When you have more of practice, this one. The more you practice, the more you will understand these things in a more in-depth manner, and the more you will understand how much of the how much of the can execute part is actually going to be whether your estimation of what you can execute is going to be an exact reproduction of what is going to be executed actually. So I'll just erase all this, get some space. So sometimes what we think we are going to execute, particularly this is true for watercolors, not all mediums. So I think I will be doing wet on wet, and I will have this much area wetted down, and I'm going to be painting uh, a flower, right? So I will be putting red color here and it'll spread. Now, of course, there is predictable a degree of predictability where you can say, okay, if I put, you know, say 3 drops of water, the water will spread till here, right? And the paint, if I put 1 drop of paint, it will only spread till here, right? So it will have a blurry back edge. This is blurry. But can I predict the exact shape the paint will spread in? Probably not. We cannot, right? So there is a degree of unpredictableness or degree of uncertainty associated with it. And that's how that's why people say watercolors has a mind of its own. So the more experience you gather, the more your accuracy of the predictions will be, right? So that's how you actually um, can effectively balance out uh, or rather reduce the difference between what you estimate that is needed, reduce the gap between the needed part and the have part or have and can do part. So you actually bridge this gap, right? I don't know how to draw this. So you can actually bridge this gap with a lot of more practice, right? So I will, to end, before I, just let me come back here. So before I wind up, I just want to share a small analogy that I had. So I had 2 cats. One is Cookie and one was Tupai. And Tupai was the quieter one, and Cookie is Hurricane, right? So now uh, we have a bookshelf, which is this tall, right? Now Cookie always underestimates the height of the bookshelf, right? And if there is something at the top of the bookshelf and they both want to, pull it down, Cookie would jump such that from the floor, and this is the height of the bookshelf, Cookie would always jump this much and then come down, right, and sit. And Tupai, on the other hand, he was a little, slow types. He would always, so to say, underestimate the height of the um, bookshelf, and he would only jump this much, right, and miss the table. So that is what many a times we do. So a proper estimation of the target is important, and a proper estimation of ourselves and our potential is also very important, so that when we jump, we actually just jump to what is needed, right? Every time, consistently. So with that, I will let you, I'll wind for today. I'll see you all tomorrow again. Bye bye.